Hi guys, Paul from the innovation community here. Today I'm with Graeme McDermott, who is the Chief Data Officer at Tempcover. So Graeme is a senior data and insights leader with vast experience in automotive and having worked with Centrica, AA, and most recently Addison Lee. He's currently the Chief Data Officer at Tempcover, as mentioned. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for the introduction.
Just to start with, tell us a bit about yourself in a few words.
I always hate doing those intros of who am I, what am I, and I think somebody summed it up actually the other week. Said you're an actuary that's turned senior data leader. I don't think that's particularly sexy or anything, but I think it's probably a bit of a truth and reality. I started life as an actuarial analyst, training to be an actuary. Probably after about 5-6 years of trying to do the exams, I sort of called it a day. And actually, I'd already stumbled into the world. Actuarial is all about data. But actually, I particularly stumbled into the world of data warehousing and systems and automation. And I suppose those, I've ended up making a career, and I love data automation. And I sort of think, data trumps gut feel pretty much all of the time, most of the time.
And I'm sure we'll get very deep into that later on. Where did your career working in data actually start, in your opinion?
So I think, unlike a lot of people who maybe said, they come out of university and they did something and they did a few other things and then they sort of found themselves in data, I suppose I went straight into this career as an actuarial student, which is all about data and algorithms, but it predates to some extent, sort of the computing power that we have today. I remember those, we were doing things with pen and paper, but looking up formulas and data items to calculate surrender values and maturity values for people's policies. And I started to get into, well, can't we just automate ourselves out of a job to some extent? So I can write that in a computer program, and then the customer service agents could just plug in the policy number and the details, and it will tell them. They won't need us to do that. But yeah, we don't need us to maintain it and to build extra capability. And I suppose I got into that, but actually in those days, we used to share a computer. So we had to have a rota as to when the analysts were able to have it. So you could have a computer in the morning or the afternoon, but you couldn't have it all day. And it wasn't on your desk. You had to literally get up and go and sit. It's not that long ago. I'm not that old, but actually we had to go and share. Luckily, that only lasted for about a year until the company decided really the actuarial team should have a computer read. So I think that early days is all about data and algorithms, and particularly the computing power. I mean, thank God since then that, computing power is growing, 100-fold. And, nowadays you may even have access to multiple systems through cloud access, for example.
And I imagine that you where you are now, everyone has their own individual computer. So how else has that evolved over time, that data role?
I think the biggest thing is just the sheer amount of data and variety. And I don't want to get into is it the 3 Vs, 4 Vs, 5, 8 Vs of data. I think just the sheer variety and volume of data that you can get, and that's both internal data, but also external data. And, luckily that availability has probably, had to keep pace with technology to some extent. I remember the early days where you might have had lots of variety of data, but actually you just couldn't process it, once a week, never mind every day, never mind real time that, a lot of people are trying to do nowadays. So I think that to me has been the big thing. And also that particularly, when I've spent a lot of time in the insurance industry, the availability of external data. When I started the insurance industry, lots of companies were very inwardly focused, only analysing and looking at their own data. I think when I sort of, the time I spent in insurance before I sort of left about 5-6 years ago, the step forwards in the amount of external data company was using to, firstly, to detect fraud, to detect if people were, lying about their claims, to do all sorts of checks before you even set up a policy. Never mind the subsequent stuff that you can use, later on in analysis, for example.
So what are you up to in your current role, or new role, we should say?
Yeah, new role. So, I mean, I think, probably aren't that many people that decided to change role mid-pandemic. In case anyone's listening to this in a year or two's time and go, what's this pandemic thing? Hopefully it's going to be etched on people's minds probably for centuries, I think, actually, and hopefully taught to school to kids as to what happened. I think it's fair to say that my last company were going through a sales transaction earlier in the year. I was looking for an exit. As the pandemic hit in late March, anyone working in the travel related industry or retail, saw a significant downturn in sales performance. So I sort of used it as an opportunity to exit. That was always the plan. And actually, Tempcover came knocking on the door just at the right time. They were looking for their first CDO. So they'd done a management buyout a few years ago, growing very fast, and looking for somebody to really sort of help them with their data journey. And I remember the CEO sort of coming to me over LinkedIn, and not a very atypical recruiter type approach. And instead of sending me sort of like a 50-page job description where they just Googled every CDO terminology and jam-packed it in a job title and a job description, actually they just wrote down 5 objectives and said, this is what we want you to come and do. Are you interested? And there were some added attractions of going to a small company, but growing very fast, done very well throughout the pandemic. Being the first CDO at a company is always a bit of a challenge, as well as obviously it's good to often be there rather than follow somebody else. And so actually, it's really great to join Tempcover at a really exciting time. That's what they told me at the time when I joined and saw the performance and seeing everything they're doing. Go, this is a really exciting time to be joining something like that.
And we've seen it on LinkedIn and we've seen it elsewhere. What do you think really interests you about working with data?
So I'm going to say that I do ultimately prefer to make decisions based on data and analytics. So I'm not a great gut feel person. I still believe that ultimately your gut feel is probably informed by data, or at least my gut feel is informed by data. That's where my route into work this morning. It's the first time I've gone into the office for 6 weeks. I needed to be in for various reasons. There's only 2 other people in here. We're mostly shut the office. You only come in if you really, really need to for some reason. And, I still put up, sat nav. I know the route to the office. I've been doing it for 4 months now, on and off. But actually, I still wanted data to tell me what was the optimum for traffic reasons. So I still think I live my life by using data to a greater or lesser extent. Not everyone necessarily thinks they are, but if you use anything from sat nav or Amazon suggestions, etc., I'm sorry, but all those things that are suggested to you are based on data, and I suppose that's ultimately what I believe is the right thing.
And I think that your own experience of becoming a CDO, a different organization recently, I mean, how has that affected the new role and also the wider organization, in your opinion?
I think I've very quickly earned the title of data geek or data nerd, and I probably, to be fair, play up to it a little bit. So when I do the monthly director stand up and I take my turn, I have a little bit of a quiz. My quiz is obviously always based around data. We're not talking algorithms here. We're just talking simple things, just to get people thinking about how you use data. My last one was observational data. So it was questions were about actually things in the office and how many things. So how many TVs are on the wall? How many steps does it take? And you'd be surprised in a company actually how many other people knew what those numbers were, or could sit there remember and try and work it out, and actually not even realizing that intuitively they are using data and numbers every day. So I suppose coming here, I'm trying to impress upon them, using data to make decisions. But actually, they were already, I could see that from the time I spent on the interview, because they were interviewing me, but I was also interviewing them. Are they the right organization for me to join, or am I going to just be pushing snow uphill in a heat wave? No CDO wants to go and join an organization where you're told one thing and you arrive and it's something completely different. And I could see already they were very numerical, so their approach to making decisions was incredibly quick and numerical. But I don't necessarily think always that they had the right data that was supporting the numbers necessarily.
And do you think that every organization needs a senior data leader?
So do you know what? I think over the last few years, of course, I'd unanimously say yes, of course, because I am one of those and I'm in a community of those. I suppose the challenge I have to myself is that, and I think the example is actually from my previous company. So you take my previous company, they were family-owned business for 38 years. They didn't have a senior data leader, in my view. They had some very commercial people. They had a lot of family in the business, and they knew how things worked, how everything worked. And they could make decisions. You might argue, you could say it was gut feel, but actually, they could intuitively look out the window at 9 o'clock in the morning, look at the big screens and say, we're going to do this many journeys today. And I tell you what, the next day I'd look up the actuals and go, crikey, they were only like 50 away in 20,000. I mean, we had a guy with a PhD that couldn't forecast within hundreds of tomorrow's numbers, never mind somebody who just looked out the window at 9 o'clock. So I think actually I had sort of great admiration that gut feel from the family orientated or just a group of individuals who've been together for a long time in a business. Actually, sometimes data will struggle to outdo that. Where it came unstuck, and where I think therefore you do have to have a senior data leader representing them, is that when the business was sold and the family and those people leave the business, that generally happens in that type of arrangement, is that suddenly all your gut feel has gone out the window. And actually the thing you rely on then is data. And if you haven't got your data in place, so when I walked in and a lot of those people had left, they had loads of reports, but not sure anyone looked at them. And if they did, they might have spotted that most of the reports were inconsistent with each other. They literally would say one number on one report and the same metric would be a completely different number on another report. And you can't run a business where you don't trust the numbers, and no one trusted the numbers. So which meant everyone generated their own reports, and you end up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds literally of reports, which just isn't sustainable.
Yeah, that's a great success story, I think, because you've applied, you're now at a smaller company, which is already more tech driven. So you've got a really wide array of experiences. I mean, having this diverse background, what would you say are some of the major successes you've achieved over your career?
Whew, blimey. I think, I don't necessarily any sort of particular sort of standout. I think I'm there to, I wouldn't consider myself to be sort of like, I don't think it's say transformational in the sense of very sort of short, sharp shot transformational. I prefer to come in and get things sorted, and it can take time, but do it in a cost-effective way. And by that I mean move the business towards being much more data centric, being much more data driven in how it makes decisions, but not in a massive big bang. That just isn't my sort of style. I tend to be much more. You come in and you assess the situation, you work out what needs to be done, and you fix those things over time. And it's a bit like, if you buy an old house and you want to renovate the house, but you've got to live in the house, you try doing that. I've done it once, and actually, you do sometimes have to cobble things together just to keep the lights on. And it's very easy to go in somewhere, get a massive budget, tell them we're going to do a massive transformation, spend 2 years doing it, and then you'll probably see that senior leader leave, which probably means they got fed up with the company, or the company got fed up with them, and they're just cycling around, because a lot of those times you'll see those transformations didn't actually complete. My track record is much more, I tend to go somewhere, stay somewhere for a number of years and do that journey. I'm not so saying it takes a long time, but it's much more sort of gradual and ingrained. And also you have to change, because you might come in and think we need to go in this direction, and then actually after 6 months or a year realize you either need to go in a slightly different direction, or actually the business has equally moved in the time you've been there. So you do need to make a change of direction.
And tell us about a specific time then that you affected change in a major organization, some of the challenges, some of the barriers as well would be great.
I think actually when I did move to London and to work for a sort of travel business, Addison Lee, I was following, and I was sort of asked to join them by a previous boss who was now the CEO. So that's a great, when you're joining someone and that and you get on with, and they trust you, that's a big tick, and that makes any job easier. Never mind coming in and being told, look, it's a bit of a mess, can you come and sort it out? And instead of being looking over my shoulder saying, no, do it this way, do it that way, actually, his style is very much more hands off. Just tell me what you're doing from month to month and just get on with it. And actually, when I came in, I remember doing the assessment in the first sort of like 4 to 6 weeks, giving them the rundown at the board meeting as to what I sort of thought. And they actually thought I'd been maybe overly kind of their situation in terms of their sort of data analytics maturity. And I sort of said, look, this is the number of things we're going to do, and we're going to do it over the next 18 months. And they said, well, can't we do it 6 months? I said, well, you could try, but you'd actually have to throw quite a lot of money at this. I think we'd break a lot of things. And actually, why do we need to do it in 6 months versus taking 12 months, 18 months to get everything right? Because one of the biggest changes we had to make probably was changing the team. I know, nothing against the people I necessarily inherited, but for example, they had a contract-heavy team, so 3/4 of the staff were contracts. Well, that takes time to bring in permanent members of staff. Often you find them, they're working their notice, you then have to bring them in, you then got to get them up to speed. And then obviously, the natural style of contractors is they're going to protect their wage. And actually that takes a little bit of time to run them off. So the people side of it took more time probably than the technology side or data governance side or the reporting side. And we were also at the same time as a company going through quite a major transformation. So you're trying to say, I think our endpoint is over here, but actually the company's transformation was sort of moving that endpoint, I suppose, in a different way. And by that, I mean, we were expanding into the US, we were expanding into Europe, we were doing other things that changed the data landscape. So your data transformation, your data journey has to change and be linked to whatever is going on in the business strategy from month to month, year to year.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. And it's a good point to bring up. How do you engage and communicate with the senior leadership team who aren't as data savvy, but they're really the ones making the decisions? And there's another follow-up. What do you think the consequences are to an organization without that senior leadership buy-in?
So I think I'll answer that last bit first. I think I've definitely tried to be the senior data leader and to change things without that support and that buy-in. Did I not get the buy-in? Did I not attempt it? I don't know. Maybe it's a few years ago, and I hadn't realised that it was that important, should we say? And it's really, really hard work. It comes back to my, it's like pushing snow uphill in a heat wave. You're not going to manage it. And I think the difference was that I've seen when you do have that support, and not just from your boss, but also from the board that says, we know we need to change. We need you to help us to change. But at the same time, you are trying to communicate. And back to your first point about how do you communicate, it's sort of like, it's like always on, but you can't have it so that it's sort of like, communicating, sort of them having to sort of, be on the end of a fire hose. Because if it's a constant stream of communication to them and new things all the time, they just get lost in it. So we just found, actually what we did is we found it easier to sort of segment, shall we say, some of our stakeholders, classic analytical technique. So we segmented our stakeholders and we found the ones that said, what, no offense, but they're going to be really easy. They're very numerical. They get this data thing. It'll be very easy to tell them once, give them to self-serve, and they'll be off and running. And they'll ask us, way more complicated questions in the future. And they'll be our advocates. So, we started with them. I'm going to be honest, there were some people we, immediately identified as they're going to be a struggle. They're going to be difficult. It's not their bag. And actually we did make them, last. So we communicated globally and overall, but often we pick off stakeholders in these sort of groups. And then you sort of tended to have sort of two groups in the middle who perhaps were used to the sort of stuff you can do from previous companies. Again, very easy just to go on LinkedIn, see where people have worked. Some of them have worked at incredibly data-centric organizations. You knew that they would find it really easy to get on board. Others, you just thought, look, their background is they've worked at companies, those are not particular data-centric organizations. They're going to struggle to get on with it. Even if the CEO is sort of sponsoring and endorsing you, you're going to get a little bit of pushback sometimes. But, with, definitely the last journey I did, certainly with Addison Lee, was so much easier having the CEO. He was on board to it. And you take examples like some of the self-serve dashboards we built, he became the most prolific user, to the point where he was looking at the usage dashboard that sits behind it saying, why aren't the rest of my directors looking at this every day?
And the divide and conquer approach, it sounds like it worked. So does that work for team members as well? Because just taking what you said earlier about Tempcover being a bit more data driven, do you find that strategy works down the chain as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do remember in previous teams we did Myers-Briggs and we did insights and discoveries, where the sort of like psychometric profiling of your teams. And actually, some of it was done more for a bit of fun. Because actually, when everyone sort of stands up and says, this is what my profile is, people were sharing their profiles afterwards. actually helped us, I think not just as management to understand better about people in our team, but also for team members to understand about their manager. So I think some people went, "Oh, right, now I get it. So when I send a great big, bullet pointed list to you on a Friday, you sort of ignore me and then phone me on Tuesday and as if you've never read it." And actually, it's because they had different profiles, and vice versa. People who said, "Oh, now I get it, that you prefer short, sharp. You don't want a sort of long, big picture thing. You just want to be told the exact, thing that you need to get." And so actually, we did use it partly as a bit of fun, bit of team building. And I think a lot of people got it, that this is my profile, this is my manager's profile. It will actually help me for us to work together better in the future. And certainly from my point of view, when I was I was running the sort of department, it made me realize that certain combinations of individuals maybe won't work as well together on a certain type of project, for example.
That makes a lot of sense. And you joined Tempcover as we record this 3 months ago now. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for improvement right now?
I think so. I think one of the first things we was already in build when I arrived was they were sort of building a sort of, call it a proper data warehouse. So that's not to say they hadn't done anything in the past, but they built actually a lot of capability. They built dashboards, they built reporting. And actually, even their own admission in hindsight, they wish they probably brought a CDO in earlier. They'd probably put in a data strategy, and then actually built out, a proper foundation. Whereas, I'm probably doing what I've done before, where I'm coming in and saying, right, well, those things are not broken. They're not too bad. They're a bit manual. One of the reasons I'm in today is because, I'm actually hands-on, manually having to update some of the reports that are better done in the office. So that's ridiculous. We're in a pandemic, we're all working from home. Actually, they're not as quick working from home. Those things, to me, there's a great opportunity that on a Monday morning, when all the weekly dashboards update, actually they update automatically in the background. I've come from organizations where that is what we had set up. 8:30 on a Monday, 9 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, all those things update. If you take that manual overhead out of our team's effort, then you don't make mistakes, and you've got more time to do, more ad hoc sort of analysis and question answering, rather than I spend all day every Monday outputting the reports. And that's not good use of people's time in this day and age, I don't think.
Mm. And what do you think was the biggest mistake you made during your own career?
Do you know what? I think when I was sort of, if I go back probably, I don't know, 15 years maybe, and I was sort of starting to be head of analytics, head of data, I'd been working somewhere for a number of years by that point, probably for about probably nearly 10 years at the AA by that point. And I suppose because there's no one else around you in that company that is in that role, I probably didn't seek outside, sort of peers, network, etc. That I did years later. And, that helped me. And I suppose I put time back into it now, in that I get requests on LinkedIn and someone says, look, I'm looking to be a CDO in the next few years, or I'm looking to be a senior data leader, or I'm struggling with this. And so I try and put my time back in by helping people, in those sort of data networks. So I suppose the thing I wished I'd found earlier is a mentor. I had a mentor within the company that was not in my arena, and that helped me to work out how to sort of manage stakeholders. So, the CTO, I think it was at the time, or CIO at the time, actually became my mentor. But I wish that I'd had somebody outside of the company, and particularly in data, that was already a well-established senior data leader that I could, speak to, talk to, meet with from time to time, just to help my own, sort of career, I suppose.
And you mentioned that you come back into the office today for the first time in 6 weeks. What does your work from home routine look like?
So I think I'd like to say over the summer, so I think it's definitely changed. And I think a lot of people probably say this. Over the summer, I got into a really good habit of getting up, doing the sort of early morning check on things like sort of our dashboards and reports, probably 6:30 in the morning over my cornflakes. I probably went for a run. I was probably then back at my desk at 8 o'clock. sometimes I might not have time to that because there might have been a problem, so I might resolve the problem, and then I go for a run, so mid to late morning. So I just take half an hour out to go for a 5K run, and that became part of my day. I think in the winter it's colder, it's wetter, it's not as nice, and I believe it's more that than I'm just fed up after 9 months of working from home and bored with exercise. I think actually just genuinely that weather just makes you feel like lethargic, should we say. So I've tended to have less time for that. So now I sort of tend to sort of, hit the keyboard at sort of 7:30, 8 in the morning, but then disappear at lunchtime and actually go for a 2-mile walk. And I like to say I leave my phone at home. I try to leave my phone at home, but sometimes I've just got it on me just in case somebody calls, etc., or I get a Teams message that meeting's changed. And just part of it actually is just thinking about other things. And I also try and walk as fast as possible, so it's speed walk, and that's just part of my exercise, I suppose. But yeah, I think I'm quite lucky. I've got quite a good setup at home. I look out over the garden. One of the things you've learned over this time is the variety of home setups. Some people have got some amazing setups, and some people they've got to do the best they can. They're on the dining room table. Their kids are coming in, particularly when it was earlier in the year when it was homeschooling. For me personally, I'm shut away in a sort of office. I've got my big screens, and I can cope with it. I miss the interaction. I miss the conversation at the coffee machine. Just bumping into people, for example, chatting over lunch. Which can be both social and also work related. I think it's hard to mimic in a Teams, Zoom type environment, frankly.
What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
Crikey. I don't know if it was a bit of advice, but a former boss who was incredibly bright said to me, "You're always right, Graeme. You're not always right at the time." And I sat looking at him puzzled, going, "What are you talking about?" And I think he wanted me to get it. So rather than explain what he meant, I said, so I'm always right, but I'm just not right at the time. So you saying then that in the long term, I'm right? He said, yes. I said, so why am I not right? So why is it not right all the time then? He said, well, because actually sometimes whilst it's right in the long term, that's what we should do. And that's the direction we should take, whether it's, budget or people or techniques. Actually, you need to look at the situ you're in. So bear in mind that, a lot of my background has been working in companies that are private equity owned. And often there's another transaction coming, which could be a year away, could be 2 years away, 3 years away. And actually, you need to take an assessment of where we are in that journey, and maybe just where we are in the year in terms of just commercial profitability. Are we going to hit our numbers? So sometimes it's like saying, yeah, look, we need to increase the size of the team. We need to do this. We need to invest in that. But actually, that's right for the long term. But for the immediate term, perhaps we shouldn't do it just now. We should do it next month, next year. And so actually, it's made me think more about when I'm, making business proposals. It might be saying, look, I think this is the right thing to do, but I don't think we should do it for 6 months, or I don't think we should do it for a year, or I don't. Do you know what I mean? So you do land it, but you do actually take account of, and somebody might come back to you and say, I disagree. Actually, I think we should bring that forward, and we should find a way to find the budget, for example, to do that now. I accept your points about why you think we should delay it, but I think we should bring it forward. So I think it's more about the situ than anything else.
What are you curious about right now?
So I just, so I suppose I've been spending a lot of time reading a lot of articles, looking at, AI, and in particular, sort of the application, I suppose the relevant application to the company that I'm in. And, AI is a pretty big umbrella for lots of sort of techniques and methodology. Is it deep learning? Is it machine learning? Is it NLP? Is it vision? And people forget that actually there's like there's a broad umbrella, and then there's some categories, and then there's some subcategories, etc. And I suppose I'm spending more time reading articles, reading use cases, seeing where people have got real examples of it working, as opposed to the novelty examples. Oh, that's really interesting, but how do you make money from that? Or, it's going to cost a lot of money. And also trying to avoid some of the horrific bias that you see occurring, whether that's, I remember reading the example of I think it might have been a Google engineer or somebody that built a little vision program that could spot his cat about to come through the cat flap, and whether it was carrying a bird or a mouse or something. And I think he trained it on birds, but therefore forgot to train it on mice. So of course the first time it failed was because it came in with a mouse rather than a bird. And you're thinking, isn't that blinking obvious? And I worry that there are people who, we got this technology, we just don't spend as much time as we used to spend thinking about the problem. So actually, what is the problem? What is it we need to try and have a solution for? And we keep talking. People talk about this, sort of fail fast and learn everything. I don't actually believe in it. I think if you do think about it, spend a little bit of time up front thinking about it. I think there's a guy, Graham Hogg, that talks about, slow down to speed up, but actually just slow down slightly, have a think about it, not overthinking it, and you'll actually end up with a better solution as a result of it.
Who is your favorite thought leader or author?
I don't think I have an individual one. I think I do follow a lot of people on LinkedIn, and equally that can be quite difficult because you're just trying to keep track of conversations, and actually when I worked in London and I commuted every day, it was really easy on the train to find time to read articles and keep on top of things. Now, because actually you're not really commuting, and if I do go into the office, I drive. It's a bit of a novelty versus having to spend 5 years on the train, and so you don't find as much time to sort of read and study those articles. So I wouldn't say I sit there and I'm so impressed by people outside of my sort of industry necessarily. So I tend to look at the people, the thought leaders, the people who are doing the big transformations, and in some ways, I'm sort of jealous. They've got the ability, they've got the situ to go and do it, but at the same time, it probably isn't my bag. So actually, I'm quite happy with doing the transformations and the journeys that I do versus turning up at a massive company. This is a super tanker you're trying to turn around. I'm not sure I fancy a super tanker. I think it's a lot of hard work, and I'm possibly a bit thankless to some extent.
And you mentioned earlier that you get reached out to quite a lot from heads, directors, VPs of basically the functions that is one step down from the CDO role. So my last question would be, what advice would you give for aspiring chief data officers?
I think so. There's a lot of talk about what generation and what version of CDO are you, and I think they mean different things to different people. So from my perspective, I consider myself to be much more of a chief data and analytics officer. So I'm much more at the exploitation end and less at where CDOs came from. Sort of probably 10 years plus ago, where it's very much sort of a US thing coming to the UK, into sort of banking, into governance of data, CDO office, which is all about sort of asset management and of the data, for example. And, large companies, exploitation teams will sit out in the sort of business function. So I tend to be much more, I run, sort of single data functions. So the CDO is the senior data leader. It's much more about reporting, analytics, data science, but also got the data governance and engineering. So it's sort of like cradle to grave element of data. So I suppose what I'd say to aspiring ones is work out where it is you want to be, because do you want to be at the pure and only sort of governance end, which is what a lot of CDOs get recruited for now, or actually you're looking for somewhere that is much more towards the chief analytics and chief data scientist type role, or do you want something that is broad spectrum? So I think you need to understand that the CDO role title can mean different things to different people, and by that I mean a company, a recruiter that's probably in between you, and in your own mind. So somebody may approach you about a CDO role, you read the job description and go, crikey, that's I can do all of that, or I can do none of that, and not realize that it's one flavor of CDO. It's not quite, CFO, CMO, CEOs tend to have pretty distinct job roles these days, and job descriptions to some extent. I think CDO, you will find quite a variety. And I still think, I was approached recently by somebody who said, we're thinking of going out to market for our first CDO. I said, oh, great. He said, we haven't written a job description yet. I said, okay, so how have you decided? Do you need a CDO? Well, we know because everyone else is doing it. Okay, that's a bad sign for starters. You're just doing it because everyone else is doing it. I said, I asked a few questions, and actually it made them think about why do they want a CDO, or why do they want a senior data leader? Where is that going to sit in the organization? And actually it fired off a few alarm bells to them, which has made them think again about, is it a CDO? Is it a director of data? Is it head of data? And also, what is how broad is the role? So is it all the bits I talked about earlier, or is it a much narrower focus that we just want actually just someone who's very experienced in data to join us and to try and make sense of our sort of jigsaw puzzle that we've perhaps scattered on the floor, for example.
Great advice from Graeme McDermott, Chief Data Officer at Tempcover. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul.